Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really glad to do it. I'm looking forward to it, Adrian. Ah, good questions, which I knew you'd have. You know, it's interesting how I got into this field. Decided after having an opportunity to teach a class as an MBA student that I really wanted to go into education, and I had a really close friend who had been in the MBA program with me, who had gone to a small school in Michigan to get a PhD at Michigan State. And it was in a field called physical distribution. And we corresponded, and he said, boy, this is really a new and emerging field. And he says, I know you've got an interest in challenging areas. Why don't you take a look? Well, I went up and visited, and I was hooked from that moment on. I met Don Bowersox, and that was back in the 70s. I was very young at that time. I think I was 11, one of the younger PhD students. But the field just seemed intriguing to me. There was a lot of opportunity in it, and I thought I'd give it a shot. And it was the best thing I ever did. I found it fascinating. I found it challenging, and obviously stayed with it for now almost 40 years.
No, that's great. So as you look back over those 40 years, is there anything that you said, gosh, when I started and I look at everything that's going on in the industry today, I'm sure that a lot of the stuff you couldn't even imagine. What is the biggest change that you've seen kind of when you started in the industry versus today?
Well, I mean, we this was an industry that was basically um, a bunch of truck drivers and people pushing freight around when I got into it, and some very I think there's some critical things that happened along the way. Number one that I look back on that really helped the development of the industry was simply deregulation that we brought about there in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think that probably had the most profound effect on our ability to do an effective job in logistics. I look at very simple things like barcodes. I mean, what could be simpler than a barcode? But look what it's done for our ability to do so many different things within the supply chain. And now we get to the level of the internet, and we see what that's enabled us to do and how it's helped consumers shop and made us respond to them more quickly. Uh, More lately, I think what's been intriguing is to watch the evolution of supply chain leaders to move into the C-level, into the C-suite, and we can tick off a number of companies where we've seen the supply chain leader become the CEO of the organization. Just a few small companies. Number one, I guess, would be Walmart. Um, and then I think the other thing that has been challenging and fun to be participating in has been just globalization and what that has meant to the supply chain field and the challenges it's created and what it's required us to do in managing that whole function. So those are some of the things that over my career I think have been uh, very important in terms of the evolution of the field.
Yeah, those are all great, great examples, especially that, the current trend, as you highlighted, in terms of seeing, more and more supply chain executives or people who have come up the, supply chain logistics route, heading into the C level. Um, when you look at, supply chain is such a broad, topic these days, and you focused on many different areas in terms of your research throughout your career, and you've had the opportunity to consult with, many different companies. Um, Kind of what have been some of the key research areas that you've looked at, and as you think about, your work to date, I mean, is there a particular research project or consulting engagement that kind of sticks out in your mind as something that when you think back on it, was really enriching and thought provoking?
Yeah, there's a few things. The most interesting and I think impactful research is probably one of the most mundane things that I've done in my entire career. It was back in the 90s, and I was working with a lot of warehousing companies, and as well as, I mean, 3PLs, as well as some of the warehousing function within manufacturers. And one of the things that kept bugging me was the fact that manufacturers and 3PLs uh, couldn't get a good grip on what rates should be, what the cost of warehousing really was. So I spent 2 years um, working with both manufacturers, retailers, and third parties in trying to understand how one determines what are the true costs of warehousing, because we seem to have a real disconnect when a 3PL presented a proposal to a manufacturer and the manufacturer says, well, I'm not going to pay your overhead. Why should I be paying for you to drive a Cadillac? And so I really spent 2 years trying to figure out a cost model for warehousing. And at the end of that 2 year period, created a simple Excel spreadsheet and then about a 15-page manual that explained how it worked, and then another little manual that explained, here's the definition description of warehousing costs. And so it was done. And I didn't think much about it. And then people started calling me and saying, geez, this really makes a lot of sense, and it's really helped us when we work with our third parties to figure out, cost plus arrangements and contracts and so on. Well, over the course of time, we gave away, I decided I wasn't going to sell this, it was an academic thing. We gave away 12,000 copies of the warehousing cost model. And to this day, I still see it on people's desks when I go into their office, a dog-eared version of this thing. So here was this fairly mundane thing. It wasn't particularly challenging research-wise. It was a little tricky to put together, but that was probably, I think, my greatest accomplishment, and probably the least academic of anything that I've done.
That's a great that's a great story and great accomplishment. I think it must be gratifying, to see some piece of work that you've done, even though at the time you might not have thought that it was, this great thing, or kind of just a mundane thing, to see it, like you said, years later, seeing ear marked copies of it on people's desks.
Yeah, it's been
And
weird. I've there's times I've sat in my, one time I was in my office and I got a call from this person out on the West Coast, and they said, we're just about to negotiate a new warehousing contract. Could you send me a copy of your cost model? I said, certainly. A day later, I get a call from the manufacturer, says, I'm just negotiating with this third party. Could you send me a copy of the cost model? I think they were the two people that were about to negotiate. So it's been fun.
Great, great. Well, let's talk about kind of the education now, which is kind of the area that you're obviously very involved with today, and particularly in your current role. Um, one of the big buzz areas right now is how there's a talent shortage in the industry. So the first question is, do you agree that there's a talent shortage? And secondly, if you do, is the talent shortage more due to not enough, students pursuing degrees in supply chain logistics, or is it more that there's a gap between what the types of skills and knowledge that employers are looking for and kind of what, the universities and other education, programs are providing, or is it a little bit of both? Kind of what are your thoughts on that topic?
Well, I'm not 100% sure how large the gap is. I think there is a gap. And I think the issue is more one of supply than it is preparing people in the right way. I still think that we don't have enough young people understanding logistics supply chain as a career, even though I would say in the last couple of years it's really started to take off. I mean, we're seeing our program here at Miami University uh, probably triple over a 4-year period in terms of the graduates we're turning out. And it's really interesting that the type of person we're seeing, not only are we seeing business majors, but we're seeing a lot of our engineering students coming over and getting a minor in supply chain and then lined up going into that field. So, I mean, I really believe that we're doing a good job preparing these students for their careers. I think we've brought a lot of new things into the classroom that I don't think we taught 20 years ago. I mean, we do a lot of things in leadership. We do a lot of, I think, giving students an opportunity to solve problems on their own, a lot of group work and teams, experiential learning where they're out with companies. So, I mean, they all get, at least a lot of them get internships. So when they're done with 4 years, I think they're pretty prepared to take that first level job in supply chain. And I think it's still a matter of supply catching up with the demand as opposed to not preparing the students properly.
One of the things that I've been a big proponent of and have at different times written about, and it's still one of my aspirations to take more action on, although I haven't had an opportunity to, or haven't prioritized it, I should probably say. But I really believe that I kind of talked about creating this farm system for the industry, where really to create that awareness, I've been advocating the opportunity to really create awareness down at the high school level, to let guidance counselors and students know about this industry, know about this field. Again, not at a detailed level, but just to let them know that, kind of give an appreciation of how supply chain and logistics impacts their daily lives, and let them know that there are universities, such as Miami University and others that offer programs in this area, and particularly guidance counselors to help at least point that out to students who would be interested and would excel in that. Um, do you do any kind of outreach there where you're located? To local high schools, any kind of interaction between the high schools and the universities to kind of create that broader awareness?
Not that I'm aware of, but I think that's something that I agree with you. We ought to be doing more of, and I know CSCMP has tried to do that through their roundtables, where they have sent a lot of the roundtable members to local schools to try to drum up that interest and get people to understand it. And I think that's having an impact. What I think is probably having the greatest impact now is when we turn on the TV and we see these brown trucks and these people saying, "We love logistics." I think that I was talking to a UPS executive a couple of weeks ago, and I said, "I think you've done more for getting people's interest in this as a career than anything I can remember in my career," because everybody sees those ads, and I think it's that kind of an awareness that is, I mean, we're really starting to see an increased demand for people in logistics and supply chain. And again, I think that that ad, and I think people reaching out to high school students is a big part of it. And I think we need to continue with those efforts so that we could grow it. But then we need the faculty to be able uh, to support these classes and to be able to teach the student. I know this year we hired 2 new faculty in the supply chain area, again as a reflection of the level of growth that we're seeing in the major.
Great, great, and great point about the the UPS and the we love logistics campaign, and certainly I know just when people ask me, so Adrian, what do you do for a living, or kind of what's your focus area, and I can tell you, when I started out 15 years ago, and I would say supply chain logistics research, I would get this glazed look like, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about,
Yeah, they probably thought you were
but now
crazy.
right. But I think now because of this greater awareness in the media, even just the mainstream media, I mean, if you read the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, or any of the business magazines, you are seeing, the word supply chain in there talked more about from a business context in terms of the challenges and the opportunities that, supply chain are providing companies, and how that the link between supply chain and business, again, ultimately, I think is becoming much clearer to the broader, business population.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
so you,
interesting. I was just going to add that I was invited by our local Rotary to come and give a speech 6 months ago at their meeting, and I went in there. I mean, I couldn't get out of there. I mean, I had so many questions from people on this. What is supply chain logistics? Isn't this fascinating? And I got all done with it. And 2 weeks later, they called me and said, would you come back and give us part two? Everybody was so enthralled with what this area is. Then my wife asked me to come and speak to her investment club about it, and they want me to come back again and talk because they see it has such an impact on the stocks they're buying. So the word's getting out there, and people are really fascinated by the area.
well, that's great to hear. uh, so I want to ask a question about undergraduates, and then I'm going to move on to folks that might be already in the industry, and kind of the role of education playing there. So, in terms of undergraduates, I mean, certainly I'm sure there's a lot of recruiters that that come to the university. What are you hearing from them, from the recruiters, in terms of times the types of skills and knowledge and qualities that they're looking for in undergraduates to help them be help them get set up to be productive supply chain professionals.
You know, Adrian, I really don't think it has changed dramatically over the last 15 or 20 years. I mean, I think it's pretty much the basics. They certainly want someone that has a passion for supply chain and logistics. That's kind of a price of entry, and I think they look for that in their recruiting process. But so we assume then that people that are going into the field have that passion. So what's beyond that? And it's the typical things. They want students who have demonstrated leadership, students who can communicate, students can talk about strategic thinking. And I think, those are the kinds of things that then spur us as academics to change the way we teach, and so that we can bring in, more case studies, more live, practical uh, problem solving, more strategic thinking, and then we encourage the students to be involved in organizations and take leadership roles on campus. And frankly, I'm amazed at the level of participation of a lot of our supply chain students in student organizations, and the experience that they're getting from a leadership standpoint. And almost every one of them is getting some type of a summer internship, and that may be for two summers, which is really unusual compared to 10 or 15 years ago. So they're getting some hands-on experience, they're getting some leadership, they're problem solving, they're getting the strategic thinking and the communication. And I think beyond having the passion for the area, those are pretty important areas to be looking at.
Great points, and I think I think you're right. I think all those things are important. Um, when I think about kind of what's happening in the the academic world, certainly one of the biggest things that I've seen over the past few years is is kind of the growing rise of e-learning and these, massive open online, online open courses. Um, and I know that you've got some experience in that area. What is the role of e-learning in supply chain education? What are the some of the pros and cons? Um, and what other kind of innovations are taking place from a teaching perspective? To help students, both undergraduates and graduates, kind of become better leaders, become better professionals.
Well, let's start with the e-learning. I mean, I think from the standpoint of supply chain and logistics at presently, I think the value is really in professional development right now after students have graduated. I mean, you can get you'll eventually get a supply chain degree online if you want, and I think that's great for people that can't go to a campus. But I mean, there's so many other enriching things that happen on a campus that's a useful experience. But right now, I look on e-learning as a way uh, to grow and develop and to professionally evolve as you go through the different managerial levels. And it certainly makes um, getting additional education a lot easier than having to go to a particular location, and you can do it on your own time. And I think, a lot of the certification programs that are available, they're developing e-learning preparation courses and so forth. And that's obviously very, very valuable in that setting because, again, people can learn on their own time. So at the present, in the supply chain area, I think that's a pretty key role. But I mean, there's plenty of universities now that you can get a very good MBA online, and that can easily be a supply chain focused MBA. So you can do that. And I think we're going to see more of it in the future. It's not obviously exactly the same as being face to face and in the classroom, but it certainly does have its advantages in terms of um, using someone's time effectively. And as I've gotten into this area right now, I'm leading our efforts in the Farmer School of Business at Miami University in terms of developing online courses. I've gone from a non-believer to an absolute believer in the effectiveness of online learning because it can be so rich. I was watching one of my colleagues demonstrate a class that he'll be giving this summer that's online, and he was going through a simulation of a manufacturing process, and he was showing what happens when you get bottlenecks with this simulation. The thing that struck me was, wow, if I didn't understand that, I can go back and watch that 35 times until I do. But if I was in a class, I mean, okay, I saw it once. Now I've got to go back to the professor and talk to him, see him or her again. Whereas online, I can watch that till the cows come home until I finally get it. So it's pretty powerful.
Great, great. Yeah, and I agree. I think that it is an enriching, experience and complementary to, the traditional, in-person, classroom setting. I think there's I think there's a balancing act, between the two, but certainly for, ongoing education and training, I think it probably is the sweet spot at the moment. Um, thinking about now supply chain professionals that are already in industry, one of the questions that always comes up is, does it make sense, to get an MBA, right? Or is it better to try to develop a more diverse, practical experience base, or to go and do some kind of a certification, go through a certification program or take a certificate course? There's the bottom line being there's just so many different options that current supply chain executives and professionals have in terms of how they can continue to learn and develop their skills. You know, I, I'm just wondering from your perspective, you know, how does an executive make that decision? When does the MBA make sense versus a certification versus certificate program? Are they not exclusionary? Is it all of the above? So your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think they're exclusionary at all. I think the MBA is something that you really have to think through carefully in a couple of respects. Why do you want it? Is it going to be necessary to move very, very high up the ladder in a certain company? When do you want to do it? I think someone who's truly interested in going to the next level of business education, they do want an MBA, and a lot of times that MBA is required, to move up the ladder in companies. But in my experience, the advice would be you don't get the MBA right after you get out of undergraduate school. I think 3 to 5 years experience is really critical because then you go back into the MBA program and you come back with one, an understanding of the business world, but two, a lot of questions. And then three, things that are taught make sense. And we find from our experience in MBA programs that those students that have 3 to 5 to 6, 7 years experience, boy, they really have a lot of questions. They're good questions, and they seem to also be the people that learn the most. But that's not to say that an MBA is for everybody. I think that it depends on how far you want to go and whether you're aiming for the C-suite and whether major companies are requiring an MBA as an entry to that. I think a lot of certification programs are useful for particularly mid-level managers who want to improve certain skill sets. So it's kind of like we've got a menu out there, and you've got to kind of decide, what seems to be the best for your palate based on your objectives and where you want to go with your career.
Yeah, that's a great point in terms of really taking that step back and really, thinking through in terms of, what's your objective, right? Because I think a lot of, maybe not a lot, but some folks just, they and having taught at the executive MBA level, I can appreciate everything you just said because you can tell the folks that are in the class who are experienced professionals and they bring a great perspective to the classroom discussions and they're gonna take what they've learned and look for opportunities to leverage that with at their companies and look toward kind of improving their careers on that path. And then there are others that simply just want to check off a box on the and put it on their resume that they have an MBA and that's really why they're there, right? And those are the folks that ultimately you kind of question whether they're wasting their time and money, just doing that because ultimately it's not going to pay, dividends for them.
Well, you can spot them a
Um,
mile away as well. I mean, it's real obvious when you're in the classroom who's there because they want to learn and who's there because they want to punch a ticket. So
exactly.
it's
Great, great. I've got one more question here. So those of you that are attending, if you've got a question for Tom before we wrap up here, now would be the time to ask it as I kind of go into my last question here. Um, kind of as a way to wrap up, let's fast forward, let's say 5, 10 years, and as you kind of, there's so much going on in the industry, so many changes. As you look at kind of the direction that supply chain logistics is going with technology, with globalization, with regulation, so on and so forth. What skills and knowledge do you believe supply chain professionals, must have, to be successful leaders kind of in this future, as the industry is developing? And how must the universities and other kind of educational and, talent development, programs, how must they evolve to kind of help them get there?
well, I mean, I think the number one thing when you look to the future is supply chain logistics is so critical to the bottom line, to the success of the company, that it seems to me that if you want to be successful in the area and add the most value to your firm and also the most value to yourself in moving up the ladder, I think the key thing you have to have is strategic thinking. I mean, there's a real difference, I think, between a strategic thinker and a managerial thinker. A management person
Can you
can,
teach that? Can you teach strategic thinking?
pardon? I
Can you
didn't catch,
teach strategic?
can you? I didn't hear you. That it faded.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you teach strategic thinking?
Yes. I mean, we have a guy in our who teaches in our professional MBA program who teaches strategic thinking, and I've sat in his class, and it's mesmerizing. I mean, it is truly. I, I feel bad I can't have the opportunity to sit through the whole thing. It is just spellbinding, and it really makes a lot of sense. And I would think that most people who've been out there and had experience, if they're in his class, they would just be relishing every moment of that class in terms of preparing them to go back to their business and think strategically. I mean, I guess it's sort of like leadership. Um, you can teach a lot of principles about it, but you also got to have kind of a facility for applying it and using it. But uh, I think the more experience that you give students in a classroom to think strategically and to ask strategic questions, the better they're going to be in that regard. So your question is a good one, but I think there's an awful lot of principles that you can provide students with that will help them to be strategic thinkers.
Great. So I kind of interrupted you there, so I'm sorry about that. So you said strategic thinking was, number one. What other attributes do you think are important?
Um, this is something that I'm terrible about, but this whole revolution with social media, it's not going to go away, and it scares me because I'm too old to use it effectively. But I just see that growing and growing, and I don't think we can even anticipate now what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years. And I can't imagine that it's not going to play an even greater role in what we do in business and even in supply chain and logistics. So I think at least surrounding yourself with young people that understand that or knowing it yourself is going to be very, very important. And and obviously being able to work with many different kinds of people in many different environments is going to be essential. The world is not going to shrink. It's going to continue to expand, and businesses are going to expand their horizons, and globalization is not going away. So we better get a good grip on that as well. So if you're a strategic thinker, you understand the global ramifications of your business, and you're up on all of these very challenging for me to understand social type media and different ways of communicating, I think you'll be in good shape.
Great, Tom. Well, hey, guess what? You're actively involved in social media right now. And what we're doing here is kind of a
Yes.
flavor of social. So you can position yourself to your students as being, hip and with the times.
Well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to have them watch this next semester.
Excellent. Well, with that, we're out of time here. We didn't get any questions today, but certainly as you think through the topic we discussed here, and you've got any questions for Tom, go ahead and visit the website talkinglogistics.com and find the episode, and you can post a question there, and I'm sure Tom will be able to be happy to answer any questions that come on. So, Tom, again, thank you very much for making time to be part of the program today.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. It's always fun to talk about things that you love and you've done for so long, and it's been my pleasure to be involved in this.
Great. And to all of you joining us today, thank you very much for joining. And help spread the word. We're here just about every Thursday live at 12 Eastern, where we have great conversations with, thought leaders and newsmakers, just like Tom we had today. And look forward to seeing you on a future episode of Talking Logistics. So again, thank you and have a great week.
Thank you.